one blockbuster hearing is in the books, and now another is on the way. As Attorney General Jeff Sessions is set to appear before the Senate Intelligence Committee on Tuesday. It will be his turn in the spotlight, coming on the heels of testimony from former FBI Director James Comey. You know what he's going to be asked about: Russia, Kislyak, and everything else. Hello, everyone, and welcome to America's News Headquarters. I'm Eric Shawn.
And I'm Marthel Neville. Attorney General Sessions set to go under oath to answer questions about Russian meddling into the election.
Garrett Tenney has the latest on this and what we can expect at the hearing from Washington. Hi, Garrett.
Eric and Arthel, good morning to you. You can bet that Jeff Sessions will be asked a lot about the Russia investigation, but don't expect him to be able to say a whole lot about it. Remember, not only is this an ongoing investigation, but it's one that Sessions recused himself from before it was turned over to special counsel Robert Mueller. We do expect that he will also get a lot of questions surrounding issues raised during James Comey's hearing on Thursday. In fact, yesterday, Sessions said that portions of Comey's testimony are what prompted him to offer to testify on Tuesday. His statement to the House and Senate Appropriations states in part, in light of reports regarding Mr. Comey's recent testimony before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, it is important that I have an opportunity to address these matters in the appropriate forum. The Senate Intelligence Committee is the most appropriate forum for such matters, as it has been conducting an investigation and has access to relevant classified information. Now, a number of lawmakers on the Appropriations Committee, they had already been planning to ask Sessions about the Russia investigation, so they were disappointed, including Democratic Senator Patrick Leahy, who tweeted last night, now twice in 2 months, AG Sessions cancels an appropriations hearing in which I could question him about his false testimony and half-hearted Russia recusal. My message to Attorney General Sessions: Appropriations and Judiciary have oversight of DOJ. You need to testify before both in public. You can't run forever. On CBS's Face the Nation, Senator Lindsey Graham, who sits on the Senate Intelligence Committee, shared what he hopes to hear from Sessions on Tuesday.
I want to know, is it true what Comey said? Did you create an atmosphere there that people believe that you could not fairly render judgment on the president's interactions with Comey?
And one thing that has not been decided is whether or not Sessions' testimony will be in public, behind closed doors. But several senators on the Intelligence Committee have said they hope that it will be a little bit of both. Eric and Arthel.
All right, Garrett, it'll be a big day in 48 hours. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Arthel.
Well, more now on this with Kelly Jane Torrance. She's the Deputy Managing Editor of the Weekly Standard. Kelly, good to see you.
Great to be here, Arthel.
Thank you. So although we won't know the end result immediately, what are the key questions that the Senate Intel Committee will ask Attorney General Sessions?
Well, it's interesting because people thought that one of the big things that came out of James Comey's testimony, and this was actually part of the closed-door testimony, was that there appeared to be a possible third meeting between Attorney General Jeff Sessions last year and the Russian ambassador. But this actually wasn't news. A couple of Democratic senators, I believe including Patrick Leahy, wrote at the end of May, when James Comey was still FBI director, saying that they'd heard there might be a third such meeting that had not been disclosed.
So based on that, what questions do you think they'll be asking the Attorney General?
Well, they're going to ask him about this possible meeting. And this happened in April, and it's the event at which Donald Trump gave his first major foreign policy speech at the Mayflower Hotel here in Washington. And the Russian ambassador was in attendance, and as was Jeff Sessions. And people think they might have met during that time, and he did not mention that one earlier. Now, of course, we have to remember the reason Jeff Sessions is under such scrutiny is because he kind of brought this upon himself. He testified in his confirmation hearings that he did not have any contact with Russian officials during the campaign. Now, it turned out he did two times, once during the Republican National Convention and another time here in Washington. And he said later, oh, well, you know, those weren't meetings as a campaign official.
And then there's the suspicion of yet a third meeting with the Russian ambassador, same person.
Exactly. So if there was a third meeting, it probably was the briefest of meetings in public. Maybe they, shook hands, exchanged a few words at this reception before Trump's speech. But again, this isn't really big news. But the reason Attorney General Sessions is facing this is because he wasn't completely honest beforehand.
Well, so since Mr. Sessions' meeting will be closed behind closed doors, it's a closed meeting, do you think his goal will be to clear his name, clear any suspicions of any collaboration, cooperation with a Trump campaign member with the Russian meddling into the election, or a bit of both?
Well, we don't know for sure that it's going to be closed door. People are sort of speculating that it's likely to be, but I actually have to wonder, even if it is, I think the possibilities of us finding out what's said in that meeting are great, because keep in mind that the fact that Comey had mentioned this possible third meeting during his testimony last Thursday was also made in a closed-door session, and that came out pretty quickly. I mean, Washington these days, this is the leakiest Washington. You know, I've talked to people who have been working in Washington since the Nixon administration. This is the leakiest Washington they've ever seen. I mean, it's not a sieve, it's a funnel.
But quickly, before we go, Kelly, what about the Senate Intel Committee? I mean, they've been complimented across the political spectrum as doing a good, solid, unbiased job. Do you think that the questions directed at Mr. Comey come Tuesday will be at all politically charged or compromised?
Well, you know, one thing I think is important to remember is, you know, the way that liberals and Democrats are spinning the story is a little bit inaccurate and misleading. You know, Think Progress ran a piece, and the headline was, "Amid growing controversy, Sessions abruptly cancels public testimony."
Right. Now, so again, specifically the Senate Intel Committee, who has been doing a good job by all accounts.
I mean, the testimony he canceled, he's now sending his deputy. That was the Appropriations Committee. They are supposed to be looking at the budget and those related matters. Exactly. So if senators want to ask Jeff Sessions, and they should, questions about Director Comey, questions about the Russian investigation,
the Senate Intel Committee.
Exactly,
for that
that's the way to do it. Exactly. And, you know, Patrick Leahy, as you know, your reporter mentioned, is upset he doesn't get to ask Jeff Sessions about this. But there are Democratic members of the Senate Intel Committee, and I can guarantee you they will be asking him tough questions on those, and he'll be under oath.
No, and of course they will, both sides. I'm just asking, do you think those questions will be politically motivated or compromised?
I think that they will be politically motivated, in that the Democrats are anxious to get as many people in the Trump administration tarred with the idea of possible Russian collusion as possible. I'm not sure how Republicans have mixed feelings about this. They do think that there has been some wrongdoing, and in fact, that's the reason that Jeff Sessions recused himself from this, is he got a lot of pressure both from career officials and from other Republicans that, you know, they don't want it to look like this investigation is not going to be fair, because they want the truth to come out if there was no collusion, and they want the American people to be confident that that investigation was done fairly and the conclusion can be trusted.
Okay, and we leave it there. Kelly Jane Torrance, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Arthel.
Okay, take care. Eric?
Arthel, there are now some new details coming to light about the London Bridge attackers. British police say that those 3 terrorists were those fake suicide belts because they possibly planned on taking hostages after driving that van through a crowd of pedestrians. But of course, police were able to shoot and kill them first. Mike Tobin is live in London now with more. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Eric. We continue to get a look at the evidence and learn more about the attacks. We got to look at that fake bomb belt as police release the images. Not sophisticated at all. These amount to disposable water bottles wrapped in duct tape and secured with a leather belt. The fake belt is a tactic certainly not seen in the UK before. Police speculate that the motivation would be to make someone pause before shooting the attackers. Now, yesterday, police released images of the petrol bombs or Molotov cocktails that were left in the attackers' van. Those were very real. It is not clear why those were not used in the attack. And we're hearing from one of the first Metropolitan Police officers who responded to the scene. Inspector Jim Cole said one of the first things he did was send a medic down into the basement of a pub to set up triage.
A gentleman had been stabbed in the stomach. He was taken downstairs to see the medic. And at that point, there were still shots ringing out, and then a stream of people came out of the market running and screaming. So we literally just pushed them into the basement of the pub. I knew it was quite a big venue, and it seemed like the safest place to put a large volume of people at that time, so it was out of harm's way.
Moving on to the attack in France from last Tuesday. We now have video of the man who attacked a police officer at Notre Dame Cathedral with a hammer. A Paris prosecutor said the 40-year-old student was self-radicalized and had the profile of a neophyte. His charges amount to, roughly translated from French law, attempted murder of a police officer in connection with a terrorist conspiracy. Eric, back to you.
All right, Mike, quick thinking by that officer, and it could have been much worse. Thank you. Arthel?
Mike and Eric, the Pentagon investigating what officials say is yet another insider attack. The so-called green on blue shooting in Afghanistan, the latest killed 3 U.S. soldiers. They were Army Rangers. Another was wounded. It happened in eastern Afghanistan, and the Taliban is claiming that one of its own was able to infiltrate the Afghan army to carry out the attack. Connor Powell joins us live now from a Mideast Bureau with the latest on this. Connor?
Arthel, these so-called insider attacks have long plagued the U.S. mission in Afghanistan. Since 2008, there have been roughly 90 or so of these green on blue attacks where Afghan soldiers turn their weapons on their U.S. and international partners, killing at least 150 people, wounding hundreds more. Now, while this attack was claimed by the Taliban, it isn't always the case. Sometimes, often, these attacks are in fact carried out just by disgruntled and angry Afghan soldiers who have no connection whatsoever to the Taliban. It's something U.S. investigators and Afghan officials are trying to determine what the sort of nature of this attack was. But it did take place in an area where the U.S. is in fact battling ISIS in eastern Afghanistan, not the Taliban, which is fairly interesting considering that the Taliban are claiming a responsibility for this attack. And the U.S. in fact is on a training mission still in Afghanistan. And these Afghan troops that were with these U.S. Special Forces are supposed to be some of the best trained Afghan soldiers in the Afghan army, and it is concerning for U.S. officials that it is a group of Afghan soldiers who are supposed to be some of the best trained where one of these attackers actually came from. Now, this was clearly a combat mission where it was both U.S. and Afghan troops on the ground battling ISIS. And one of the things that really does concern U.S. troops and U.S. officials is this really does undermine the overall U.S. operation there. They're trying to train these the U.S. soldiers are trying to train these Afghan troops to get them up to speed to take on the fight alone by themselves. But if they can't train them, they can't go out with them, and that really does hurt the overall mission there, Arthel.
Indeed, quite a situation there. Connor Powell, thank you very much for that update. Eric?
Well, cracking down on Qatar. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson making a late-night phone call to try and head off an impending humanitarian crisis over that Arab blockade amid the accusations that Qatar supports terrorism. Ambassador Dennis Ross will be here on what they do and what that means in our battle against ISIS. That's next. Plus, a Fox News exclusive. A mafia boss talks terrorism. I sit down with former mob boss Ralph Natale, and he has a message for terrorists targeting our country. Natale says he knows exactly what to do to stop them.
I would kill them all. Yes, I would get them. Yes, I will.
You would kill the terrorists?
I would kill them immediately.
The U.S. launching an airstrike in Somalia, hitting al-Shabaab, one of al-Qaeda's biggest affiliates. According to the Pentagon, the attack targeting one of the terror group's main training bases about 200 miles southwest of the capital, Mogadishu. Reports of at least 8 militants killed. The airstrike appears to be the first one conducted under a new Trump administration policy, allowing the U.S. military to target al-Shabaab with airstrikes.
Well, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson making a late-night phone call to his Turkish counterpart as tensions escalate over that Persian Gulf and Arab blockade of Qatar. You know, the small Arab nation's been entirely cut off from its Arab neighbors for allegedly funding Islamist terrorist groups. The blockade causing some unintended humanitarian consequences, we're told. But will it force Qatar to change its ways? And what do the tensions there mean in our fight against ISIS and radical Islamic terrorism? Ambassador Dennis Ross joins us. He's a former Special Middle East coordinator, Fox News foreign affairs analyst and author of the book, Doomed to Succeed, and he joins us today from Tel Aviv. Ambassador, first of all, can you tell us how bad is Qatar? I mean, they say it funds and gives shelter to the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas leaders, and as the president said, Qatar backs terrorism on a, quote, very high level.
Well, Qatar has tried to play a double game. On the one hand, they allow us to use a very large base, and they help to make major contributions to that. That base itself is one that is really the place from which we conduct all air operations throughout the whole theater, from basically as far as Afghanistan into Syria and so forth. So on the one hand, Qatar provides obviously a level of support to what we're doing in terms of carrying on the fight against al-Qaeda and ISIS. On the other hand, they're very supportive of the Muslim Brotherhood. They're very supportive of Hamas. They welcome the Taliban. There's no question that historically they actually have provided funding for terrorist groups. In the last year, we've seen them begin to quietly go after some of the entities that the U.S. Treasury Department has singled out. So they have been responsive in that respect. But they also provide a huge platform through Al Jazeera to create a kind of legitimacy for radical Islamist views. And I can tell you, back when I was in the Obama administration, during the conflict in Libya, they were providing money and arms to the Islamist groups in Libya, the very ones that we did not want to see develop any kind of support. So what you're seeing is an effort on Qatar's part to have it both ways. What you see the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, and the Egyptians doing is saying, enough of that. That has to stop. I think one of our problems right now is it seems that the administration is really sending mixed messages. The president has been very tough, as you noted, in singling out Qatar and supporting what the Saudis are doing. We see the Secretary of State saying, look, we need to stop or at least de-escalate. The boycott is causing problems not only from a humanitarian standpoint, but from the standpoint of our military operations, and we really need to bring this under control. I can understand the need to do that, but it can't be done in a way that in the end allows Qatar a way to keep doing what it's doing.
Well, do you think that they will stop having it both ways? What you just said was astounding, and not just the support for the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas, but also for the Taliban, which just took credit for killing 3 of our Army Rangers. Do you think Qatar can actually possibly reform, or do we potentially risk the threat of having our air base, the largest in the region, you know, kicked out of there that we need to use in our fight against ISIS in Iraq and Syria?
They won't kick us out because they see the reason they allow us to use the base is because they see it as a not so subtle indication that the United States is providing a security guarantee to them. That gives them, on the one hand, a kind of assurance and a license to do what they're doing on the other hand. I think the key here, Eric, is that we need to be the ones communicating to them that we won't continue to use this base. We will be prepared to look for alternatives and develop alternatives. They want this as a source of their security. They need to understand, unless they change their ways, they're putting that at risk. You ask the question, will they change their ways? Only if they see that the real cost with us is one that begins to raise questions about their security as they define it.
And that may be happening already. Let me read you something from Heratz. The Qatar foreign minister said this: the U.S. views Hamas as a terrorist organization, but to the rest of the Arab nations, it is a legitimate resistance movement. We do not support Hamas, he says. We support the Palestinian people. And it goes on to say, shortly after the break in ties emerged, Qatar confirmed that a number of top Hamas officials who were using the country as their base had left amid pressure on the oil-rich Gulf nation. So it seems they may be getting the message incrementally. What do they need to do to get it fully?
Well, I think that would be a start. But they can't allow Al Jazeera to be used as a platform that it is right now to spread a message that basically legitimizes and makes okay a radical Islamist thought. I mean, that's one point. Another point, as I said, they have put out the welcome mat for the Taliban within Qatar. That too has to stop. It can't be that they wink at these groups or even provide them a kind of tacit support and at the same time are part of the broader coalition to be fighting these very forces.
And do you think
that's what I mean by you can't continue to have it both ways?
Do you finally, I'm sorry, do you think that will happen? That they'll get the message from the president that they've got to stop the support?
Well, I think it's good that he's sending that message. I worry a little bit about countervailing messages. It's not just the Secretary of State. The Defense Department put out the other day, in a sense, a position in which they were lauding the contribution that Qatar is making to our broader efforts in the region. So as long as if we send mixed messages, they will think they have a way out. Our message has to be a very consistent one, and then I think the chance of getting them to transform themselves and change their position, that goes up dramatically.
And how would we make that message, as you say, consistent?
Well, one thing is that there has to be, in fact, I think, one song sheet. Everybody has to be singing off the same sheet of music when we speak to the Qataris. They have to understand, look, the American position is going to be, you can be a partner of the United States, but then you can't continue to be a partner to Hamas, to the Muslim Brotherhood, and you can't be putting out on Al Jazeera a network that they subsidize, a countervailing message. I think the way to underpin this is to make it clear they can't count on us preserving the base in Qatar. If that's, from their standpoint, is the source of their security, they have to understand they're putting that at risk. Unless we communicate that, not just having everybody singing off the same sheet of music, but make it very clear they're putting at risk what they themselves see as a source of their security. That, I think, is the best way to impress upon them they're running a risk and the price is unacceptable as they define it.
Well, we certainly hope they get that message. Ambassador Dennis Ross from Tel Aviv on this Sunday. Ambassador, always good to see you. Thank you, as always, for joining us.
Thank you.
Arthel?
Well, Eric, President Trump turning up the rhetoric against James Comey, his latest Twitter blast amid the fallout from the former FBI director's testimony. That is up next.
My judgment was I needed to get that out into the public square, and so I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. Didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons, but I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel.
President Trump not taking a day of rest from Twitter this morning. Instead, the president is blasting former FBI Director James Comey and using some of his toughest words yet. Kristen Fisher is live in Bedminster, New Jersey, where the president is spending the weekend at his golf club. Hey, Kristen.
Hey, Arthel. Well, still no response from the White House about the Attorney General Jeff Sessions' testimony next week on Capitol Hill. But President Trump this morning is continuing to personally attack the former FBI director. He said on Twitter just hours ago, quote, "I believe the James Comey leak will be far more prevalent than anyone ever thought possible. Totally illegal, very cowardly." Now, the new chairwoman of the RNC, Ronna Romney McDaniels, she too was on the Sunday shows this morning, and she came to the president's defense. She was very critical of Comey's own admission that he was the one who first leaked his memos to the press.
I think it shows how questionable his character is, that he would take conversations that he had with the President of the United States, which should be protected under executive privilege, and then he gave them to a friend to leak to the New York Times. I think it proves that the President made the right choice in firing Director Comey.
Now, Comey testified on Thursday under oath that the president had said, "I hope you can let this go. I hope you can let the Flynn investigation go." The president insists, though, that he never said that. But last night on Fox, in an interview that was taped on Thursday, so before that Rose Garden press conference with the president, Donald Trump Jr. seemed to directly contradict his father by saying this.
When he tells you to do something,
yes,
guess what? There's no ambiguity in it. There's no, hey, I'm hoping. You and I are friends. Hey, I hope this happens, but you got to do your job. That's what he told Comey.
Now, despite Washington's fixation on all of these investigations, the White House is continuing to push forward with several new policy initiatives. Remember last week, that was Infrastructure Week? Well, next week is all about jobs. President Trump will be traveling to Milwaukee on Tuesday to talk about jobs and apprenticeships. He'll be heading to the Department of Labor on Wednesday to deliver a major policy speech about jobs. And then he'll be heading to Miami on Friday to unveil his administration's new Cuba policy. And he is expected to roll back many of the changes that were put in place by former President Barack Obama. So as much as Washington continues to remain fixated on Comey, the leaks, collusion or potential collusion with Russia during the 2016 election, this White House continuing to move forward with trying to actually get some things done. Arthel.
Okay, Kristen Fisher. Thanks, Kristen.
Now to our country's fight against terrorism and a seemingly new, unlikely ally. A former mob boss, Ralph Natale, is now, well, he's 82 years old. He ran the mafia in Philadelphia in the late 90s, and he says the greatest threat facing our country now is terrorism. And he says when it comes to dealing with the terrorists, he knows exactly what to do. And he told me he is more than willing to do it himself. We sat down with him for our exclusive Fox News interview.
Any man that didn't want to be a boss of a family had no manhood in him.
He was the first American mafia boss to flip and testify for the government. Now former mobster Ralph Natale has written the story of his life and life in the mob called Last Don Standing, the secret life of mob boss Ralph Natale.
I never heard a man that was innocent, a hard worker. I never touched a woman, never touched them, another child. They never.
Natale became head of the Philadelphia Mafia in the late 1990s, brought in by the legendary mob boss Angelo Bruno, who ended up getting shotgunned to death in his car in 1980. Natale has been luckier. He survived and thrived in the city of brotherly love before the feds finally caught up with him in 2005. He was sentenced to 13 years in prison on racketeering, drug, and bribery charges. But today, he worries about another threat, terrorism, and fears the nation has not done enough to defeat it.
Do you think we've been too easy?
Oh, we're pussycats.
On terrorism?
On terrorists. On terrorists.
Pussycats.
Pussycats.
What should we do?
Kill them.
Natale was astounded that the Manchester bomber, Salam Abedi, was known to authorities and says, just like in the mob, he would take care of the problem himself.
I wish I could get 4 more in me. The government would have to pay, but they would be glad to. As soon as they would point out a crew that this is where they're meeting, they're going to go kill people, their own kind, white, black, they'll kill anybody. Give me their names. I'll take care of the business.
You would?
I would kill them all. Yes, I would get yes, I will.
You would kill the terrorists?
I would kill them immediately, and then I would hang them in front of their houses, and then call the newspaper, the Inquirer. Yeah, listen, come and see what happened to those people. That's how you stop. You can't stop them. That's what I would do. I said, boy, I could make a nice living, and I could enjoy it. I would be able to do it. And my wife said, you know, that's crazy. It's not crazy.
His offer is one the government would likely refuse, but Natale worries that terrorism will remain with us.
I have 10 grandchildren, and I have 11 great-grandchildren. So long after I'm in the dirt, they gotta have to put up with this here. It's gotta be done. It's gotta be done now. There's an old Italian saying, if you don't listen to the first note, you'll never hear the rest of the song. That's what's happening today. They call me a killer, cold-hearted. I never hurt anybody that didn't deserve dying. I never did. And when it comes my time, I just want to get off a shot if I got something with me.
Well, he's blunt. Natale's book is Last Don Standing. It does detail his decades of life in the mob. But about those terrorists, well, my colleague, Fox 29 Philadelphia veteran correspondent Dave Schrottreiser, who's covered Natale for years, well, he says, quote, the wise guys like to say the Fed should spend their time and resources tracking terrorists, not mobsters. But he says with guys like Natale around, they better keep an eye on both. Natale, though, insists that he is retired. But as you heard, he told me if need be, he's ready to protect our country his way. Ralph Natale, 82 years old.
Well, that's something else.
And still going strong.
I tell you what. Well, when we come back, we're going to get back to the bombshell testimony from former FBI Director James Comey, calling into question the independence of his former boss, then Attorney General Loretta Lynch.
Protesters are filling the streets in the nation's capital this afternoon. It's the Equality March for Unity and Pride, and it's stretching from Lafayette Park to the National Mall. Organizers say the march aims to raise awareness about the challenges facing the LGBT community. The rally will feature various speakers and also have a voter registration drive.
Well, Eric, there are new concerns about the professional integrity and independence of former Attorney General Loretta Lynch, as former FBI Director James Comey's Senate intel testimony Thursday, in which Mr. Comey said Lynch asked him to call the Hillary Clinton email probe a, quote, matter and not an investigation. Arizona Congressman Trent Frank sits on the House Judiciary Committee and joins us now. Congressman, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So let's start here, sir. Do you think that former Attorney General Lynch's suggestion was criminal or an effort to avoid prosecution before the full scope of the inquiry was completed? As you know, the word investigation automatically takes on the assumption of guilt to many. So I ask you, illegal or inappropriate?
Well, if you look at what Director Comey testified, it didn't testify that she asked him or suggested. He said that she directed him to change the word from investigation to matter. And I understand why she did that. If you look at the controlling statute there, it's statute 18 U.S.C. 1924. And if you put that up on your screen sometime for the people, you will understand that there's no question in this world that Mrs. Clinton broke the law, and it was an imprisonable offense. And the only question was whether or not they were going to enforce that law. So she knew that there was a serious situation facing Mrs. Clinton, and she wanted to try to tamp it down the best she could. And yes, I think it was absolutely something that was not only inappropriate, but bordered on the illegal for the Attorney General to tell the chief investigator, don't call this what it is, because it's clear, it's clear in her mind that the law was broken. So I just think that we're missing a huge story here, and yet we've been talking about the Russian story for 6 months almost. Yeah, and we know what happened to that story here when Comey testified. That's
definitely going to continue, of course. But, of course, meanwhile, back to Mrs. Lynch. According to reporting by the New York Times, by way of a source, Ms. Lynch said the bland term was intended to neither confirm nor deny that the investigation existed, as it was a standard Justice Department and FBI practice. So you're sticking with inappropriate, right? Or borderline illegal?
The truth is, I had the opportunity to question Mrs. Lynch when I was on the Judiciary Committee, and I've never seen any more gifted dissimulation in my life. This particular person was totally sold out to the Obama administration in ways that completely undermined her credibility as Attorney General.
Those are very strong words, Congressman.
They are strong words. Unfortunately, they have the tragic disadvantage of being accurate. And so the reality is here that the left has been very good at using words. They perpetrate monotonic, polysyllabic obfuscation, semantic gymnastics, and verbal circumlocution, and nobody really understands what the real truth is. They are gifted at that, and it's rule or ruin with them. And if we don't, as a country, begin to come back and begin to have honest dialogue and principled persuasion among ourselves, future generations will suffer for it.
Well, some might say your comments about Mrs. Lynch would be considered perhaps not completely honest, but let's move on, Congressman.
If they'll read the statute, they might come up with a different conclusion. Read the statute 18 U.S.C. 1924. We all know what happened, and tell me if that statute was enforced accurately or not.
Former FBI Director Comey also testified that after clearing the room, President Trump pressed Mr. Comey to drop an investigation into former National Security Advisor Flynn. Do you consider that suggestion made by the president to be illegal or inappropriate?
No, I don't think it was illegal. I think that it was poorly done. You know, this president doesn't speak diplomat. But if you look at what he, in my judgment, was really doing there, he thought that there was an injustice being done. And, you know, he has so far been exonerated in a lot of his contention related to this entire discussion that we're having today. So I think that, you know, I thought one senator put it best, you know, no one can ever be imprisoned for hoping or somehow castigated for hoping. There's a lot of difference in the terminology here, but I'm convinced that the basic bottom line of this Comey testimony was that Mr. Comey essentially exonerated the president and essentially implicated himself as a leaker. So I think that this was a bad...
Speaking of the leaks, at 8:29, this morning, Eastern Time, as you know, the president tweeted, "I believe the James Comey leaks will be far more prevalent than anyone ever thought possible. Totally illegal, very cowardly." And of course, that's in reference to Mr. Comey sharing one of his memos with a Columbia law school professor and friend who in turn gave it to the New York Times. So I ask you, illegal or inappropriate?
Well, this was privileged information. I use that word privileged deliberately, and there are some legal consequences there. And I think that as the discussion moves forward, that Mr. Comey may have incriminated himself here. I'm not sure about that, but that's what it looks like to me.
Let's get back to former Attorney General Lynch. Do you believe that Mrs. Lynch operated independently and loyal to the letter of the law, or do you believe that Mrs. Lynch showed deference to President Obama?
I absolutely do not believe that Mrs. Lynch operated in deference to the law, and I believe that she operated in very strong, clear political deference to Mr. Obama. I see that in the strongest possible clarity.
Well, Congressman Franks, that is the way you see it. Unfortunately, we don't have Mrs. Lynch here to speak for herself or someone representing her, so we will have to let your word stand at this time, and we appreciate talking to you.
All right, hope you'll have her read the statute and explain herself. That'll be a good plan.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, meanwhile, tens of thousands of people are flooding the streets here in New York City right now for the annual Puerto Rican Day Parade. But the celebration you see there comes amid a backlash against the parade organizers and their plans to honor a convicted FALN terrorist. We'll have a live report from the parade and that controversy next.